And with that said, somebody who I have just flat out been impressed with in watching in interviews, seeing clips of some of his speeches, is the gentleman joining us now running for Congress, Dan Severson. Dan, how are you? It's great to speak with you for the first time.
Well, Trey, I am doing fabulous. How are you? And thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you on, and I really want to talk with you take some time here, chat with you about the issues. You have quite an impressive record. Let me tell you about Dan here. Dan is a retired Top Gun Navy pilot, and he has experience in legislating. He spent 8 years in the Minnesota legislature. Some of his top issues: pro-life, pro-veteran, pro-clean water, and is running to support our president. And again, for the overwhelming majority of you listening right now in Southwest Florida, this race for Congress is to represent you. It's Lee County and a huge chunk of Collier County. Dan, let me get right to it here. I want to stay topical with coronavirus, and then I would love to get into some issues about what what you'd like to sponsor, what you'd like to work on, how you see yourself as a member of Congress. What is your take on the federal government's response to coronavirus?
Well, I think President Trump has really led the way in this whole process by getting out and closing the borders early. Very, controversial to start with, but I think the left side is now seeing the wisdom of that. They won't acknowledge it. But I think the whole process of keeping America safe has been in the forefront. But, the thing that really struck me yesterday, and I was watching TV a little bit, and they had Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick from, and he really did, to me, he voiced what I believe is the heart of most Americans, and that is we don't want to give up our economy. We don't want to give up our way of life because we're afraid. And I think the seniors and those who are most vulnerable are really willing to step up to the plate and say, we need to protect our people, but at the same time, we do not want to trash our economy for future generations, for our kids and for our grandkids. And so I see a balance in President Trump, coming out, particularly today yesterday when he's talking about, I think we should be looking at Easter time frame for a break point here and start building up our economy, start engaging again. And I think it's a great balance. I this type of leadership since Reagan, and I'm just excited about it.
What's your take on these bailout packages? Dan, I don't know if you've listened to much. I don't ever expect anybody to listen to this show. But just briefly, well, thank you. But briefly, I am very critical of Republicans and Democrats in the institution because they both complain about spending when they're not in power, and then they go and they absolutely run up the deficits and bury the country more in debt. And the Trump administration has done that as well, even with the Republican-controlled Congress. Now, facing these catastrophic consequences here, we are looking at bailing out various industries and running our deficits up another $1 trillion. Any thoughts on that? I get a little frustrated, so I don't want to start going off. You go.
Yeah, no, I get you. And, one of the things when I originally got into politics, the national debt was at $8 trillion. And I remember doing the parades and walking up down the parades and talking with people, and they thought that was astronomical, out of touch, because you can't even fathom $1 trillion. And here we are at $23 trillion and looking to put a $2 trillion package together to try and keep us safe. And I think too much government tries to step in. This is a balance act. Like I said, with President Trump, he's trying to keep America safe. In the same context, he's trying to keep the economy from imploding, and I get that. But the Democrats have showed their hand in this whole process as well when they start putting this stuff in these bills to try and push their green agenda and all the other stuff that's been anchored on this. And now they're in an impasse in this, and I can look at the heart of some of the leaders from the Republican side saying, we just need to get this out and help fix our people. I really believe that is going to be the fix.
Dan, let me ask a tough question here, and then we'll move on to some of your experience legislating. And actually, let me bring in your experience legislating. You spent 8 years in the Minnesota legislature. You know that leadership will lean on you to vote for things that may include some, for example, spending items you don't like. my question to you, the Trump administration, it's President Trump who is supporting bailing out airlines, cruise ship lines, and more. Do you think that we should have bailouts?
I think when President Bush had the 2008 bailout of the ones that couldn't fail, the big markets that couldn't fail, that was a mistake. I think he should have stood his ground, and we could have suffered a lot less damage to our economy. I'm not sure because I haven't looked that deep into all of these issues, but the airlines are on the lease process, so if they don't have any income, they can lose the lease on those airframes, and so it's a lot more complex than I'm ready to dive into at this point.
Understood.
And
we'll see how I think, unfortunately for the American people, what ends up happening is and quite frankly, the legislators themselves, is they end up seeing we learn about the bailouts, quite frankly, after the legislation is passed. Let me ask you then, again, on the line with us right now is a candidate for Congress, Dan Severson. You could go to Severson for Congress. That's Severson for Congress.com. And so, Dan, you've got some experience in legislating. Could you give us an example of maybe a first piece of legislation you'd like to sponsor, or even more generally speaking, some of your absolute first priorities the day that you get sworn in?
Well, priorities. I'm a strong pro-life candidate, and I believe that Trump has been doing a great job putting conservatives on the court that are actually going to listen to the argument instead of having a partisan view in this process. And I think eventually Roe v. Wade will be overturned, and that's my hopes, and that we can stop the killing, stop the murders. But in terms of legislation for Southwest Florida, one of my passions here is cleaning up the water. And, I think we've had good legislation that's been being pushed through. I think there could be more done at the state level, but I think in terms of making sure that our district gets the money that it needs to help restore our water to its original clarity, basically, that we can really make headway in that. That's going to be one of my main priorities.
Is there anything with regards to water? Is there anything that you would do different? Are you supportive or critical of Congressman Francis Rooney's role in water?
I think he did a good job representing the district and pulling some of those funds in that we need to do some of that reparation. So I think from that context, he did a great job. I don't agree with some of the other things that he was reporting, like the carbon tax. But I think from a water standpoint,
Agreed. Yeah, you were going to go on to another priority. Go for it.
Yeah, no, I think the other is the tax Tax Cut Jobs Act that President Trump put through in December 17. And I think that was instrumental in stimulating the economy. We need to make those tax cuts permanent, and then we need to go into a process in which we do the long-term dissemination of those major business investments that are made, instead of going into an amortizing or a slow go to it where they can actually get paid back within the first 3 to 5 years of making that investment. And I think that has a big turn when you talk to the experts about that as being a single factor that will actually increase the GDP by up to 4%. So I think there's the tax reform, which I don't know that we're going to get done with the democratically controlled Congress at this point. That should be a priority for a Republican Congress coming in next.
Dan Severson's on the line with us right now. He's running for Congress, Congressional District 19, which is the overwhelming majority of you listening right now in this area. It's basically all of Lee County, a big chunk of coastal Collier stretching eastward. And Dan, as he shared with us some of his priorities, let me, I got to say, Dan, one of the things that we've been talking about fairly extensively here over the past few days is how ammunition is selling out. I have a Glock 9mm ammunition, was nearly impossible to get, and I quite frankly wasn't as prepped as I should have been. Now coming back online, I think that times like this remind us of that, yes, we can talk about the Founding Fathers' philosophy of the Second Amendment, of rejecting a tyrannical government, but damn it, we also fear the breakdown of society. Your stance on the Second Amendment, sir, do you think that, what's your take on Florida raising the age to 21, a session or two ago? Do you think that, what's your take on Second Amendment? Go for it.
Yeah, no, I believe when you start messing with the Constitution, and particularly the Second Amendment, you're running into foul territory. This is, to me, it's kind of a heart issue. And that's one of the reasons that I am running, is because I believe that Parkland shooting bill was an egregious offense on our Second Amendment rights. And, we have people in the legislature, Dane and Heather Fitzenhagen, and, who voted, and Dane in particular, was the majority whip at the time. Now, I've been the whip. I've been the minority whip. And you go around, you get all the votes, and you get everybody on board and say, hey, this is the way we're going to go. So to me, if you didn't understand it, looked into it. And it's especially close to me because, when I was sworn into the military, I rose my right hand and said, I swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I had a lot of shipmates and a lot of people who ended up giving their lives to support that Constitution, just like we have through the world wars, because that is our anchor. And when you start eroding the Second Amendment like that, it begins, just as we saw, I think, a little while ago, that Bloomberg had put $500,000 into Senator Galvano's campaign, into a fund there to basically help, him promote that Parkland bill and to actually go after it again. And fortunately, that didn't get any traction. But we have special interests that are putting money in to undermine our Second Amendment rights, and that is a passion to me to undo that and to ensure that our Second Amendment right, the right to bear arms, and to me, as to you, it is a major provision for us as citizens to push back a tyrannical government.
Dan Severson on the line with us right now, running for Congress here in Southwest Florida to replace Francis Rooney. I wasn't going to bring up any names. You did. You brought up two people who are also running for Congress, Heather Fitzenhagen and Dane Eagle. And by the way, everybody, I'll get to the list of all of the names running when we wrap up here. But since you brought the names up, let me give you a few questions here. Just kind of throwing out a few things, and you run with it.
Okay.
Dan, I'm curious about who the biggest challengers are, but you understand politics, and I do not shy away with this audience about the inside game, what goes on, how important it is to get earned media, how important it is to fundraise, how basically as a candidate you are in effect a lot like a product that you need to market. With all of that said, you yourself right that you're a grassroots candidate. Man, things just got really, really tough for you because I would assume that a lot of your campaign was hoping to go out and meet people, communicate with people. You're a veteran. You're a Top Gun pilot going out speaking to the large veteran groups, and all of that now is shut down for as far as we can see. Who are your biggest challengers? What's your path to victory?
Well, we've got a couple people that are in the race that are just kind of the rubber stamp of Francis Rooney, who I just believe, and he just threw enough money at it where he got his message out and quieted the voice of everybody else, and that's problematic because we need people who are representing the people, not special interests or representing their pocketbook because they've got a bucket list they want to complete, and so I think in terms of money, you've got Field-Soller.
By the way, that's a branding problem, but yes. But go on.
Yeah, and we've got a new gentleman that just entered the race, Askar, who's got a lot of bucks down there, and he's cut commercials, and he'll be flooding the airways as well. And you're right. A grassroots campaign just doesn't have that kind of money, so our job is to get it out appreciate you having me on, is
Sure.
to get our word out and our viewpoint out to say, hey, there are other people in this race who have a passion to serve, not be served, who have a passion to do what our founders did, and was come up with a society and a constitution that guarantees us certain freedoms and liberties, and to defend those freedoms and liberties. And that's my passion. I mean, I've got 22 years as a Navy officer, Navy fighter pilot, and then 8 years in the legislature swearing an oath to that Constitution. That is in my bones. And that's why I so much appreciate President Trump, because I believe that he is in the same vein. He gives his salary away as a president, and he does this because he loves this country.
Yep. Severson for Congress is where you can go. I'm a little short on time here because I'm really trying to balance it. Have everybody equal time. My last fun question for you, Dan, is this. Did you watch the first Top Gun movie, and are you excited for the sequel?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I had just got off the ship, off the USS Midway, when I saw the movie about 2 weeks later. And that opening scene where it's on the flight deck and the steam's coming off the cats, and it was just like, I was just there.
Nice.
It was rocking. Yeah.
With the Kenny Loggins music in the background.
Yeah, seen it, man.
SeversonForCongress.com is where you can go, Dan. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Trey.
All right, take care. Have a good one. We're going to take a break here. This is 92.5 Fox News. I'm Trey Radel. We'll be right back.